Thank you so much for tuning in to Circling Dialogos and this ongoing series of Dialectic in the Dialogos Practice sessions. So I'll set some context more about this series in a moment. First, some housekeeping. If you are interested in working one-on-one with me through consulting and coaching, go ahead and email me. My email is in the show notes below. What will happen is we'll make an appointment on Zoom for a consultation, and we'll both co-explore if coaching with me is a fit for you right now and for us. Again, email's in the show notes. In terms of circling, you can find all the information about circling at the Circling Institute, institute.com. Link below. We have open events every Thursday. We have circling intensive weekends open to everybody every 4 to 6 weeks. And we have the Art of Circling Practitioner training course, which is the year-long training. And that's still open for registration. However, it's closing soon. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and move quickly on that. All right. So this is a series where we are practicing the practice that was developed by John Vervaeke, Christopher, and myself, and many, many other people. It's the practice that we formally teach at the Circling into Dialogos weekend that we have done 3 of those so far. So I wanted to put this series on as a way of just diving deeper and exploring the practice and to fine-tune it and refine it. And so that's really the intention of this. And so far, we are learning so much, and much fine-tuning is happening, plus really realizing, I think all of us are really realizing the ongoing impact of this practice in our actual lives, our day-to-day lives. So as this series goes on, there's so many things that you can be tracking about this. On one level, new in modern practice. On another level, perhaps the most ancient Western practice at the core of intelligibility in the West. I think this practice really gets at. And I just want to remind everybody that this particular, that what we're demonstrating here is a practice that's really the end result of a culmination of a whole ecology of practices. So this is really an advanced practice. So be mindful of that and enjoy.
Yeah. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so we got to talking about family because Sandra's just spent some time with her family, right? And we were just talking about how oftentimes it's insane. People go insane when they go back and visit their families. Right?
Only temporarily.
Yeah. Right. Like
Hopefully.
And that's that in some ways that's the norm. And I definitely had an experience of my mom's side of the family, her second husband, where he came from. Their family is incredibly warm. And it's not like that. It's like everybody's really, there's an there's an unquestioned there for you-ness, right? And it's a love, and it doesn't even need to be explicit, although it is explicit, right? It's in the gathering, and it shows up in this real warm openness that people have for each other, right? And it doesn't, have problems and conflicts and all that kind of stuff, but there's some kind of warmth that is not never at stake in any of the conflicts or something like that, right? And so all of the siblings, friends end up over there, like for Christmas, and their gatherings are huge because it's like like everyone wants to be over there instead of their own families. And then we were talking about, well, what is that like? Because right now I'm having a conversation with John and Christopher, and we're working out basically kind of what the eidos, what is the Platonic form, right? What do we mean by that? What is the eidos, and how is it connected to logos? And so it's like this kind of deep engagement in this mind-boggling conversation. But Christopher, in one of them, talked about that like, for example, if eidos is missing, right? Let's just say regarding justice, right? You can have all the formations of justice. You can have laws and constitutions, and you can have formations and conversations that are all in the name of justice. But if the eidos is missing, right? Those formations are really painful, right? It's just empty, and it's just it's a form of nominalism. I think about that like oftentimes families are just that. They're a formation of love. Yet what's real missing is love, right? It's like the eidos, the thing that makes those, the thing that probably originally formed those formations, right? Is missing. And so you just have this empty hollowness, right? Think about subdivisions like that as well. Like, it's like subdivisions are like, they're built to look like houses. It's built to look like a neighborhood. It's built to look like a community. But no one's outside. No one's talking to each other, right? It's missing a reality. And so you have this really weird, empty, nihilistic kind of nauseating hell. And so when people go back home, oftentimes I think the family that comes across as in the family, big time, right? Big time.
And that even though there's no overt conflict or, at the moment anyway.
Yeah.
It's still very painful.
Yeah. It's and so all of it, and then and there's all of yet that painfulness, right? It's like there's all the idle chatter and the automaticities that go on, all the predictable conversations, right? That go on, like, mom's up, like running around in the kitchen, right? Already anticipating, right? Being nervous or not, like being approved of in some way. And so she's addressing her concern, talking about this, but actually what's really going on is like, there's a fight they've had for years that like,
and you talk about food, like Daniel was saying, people end up spending hours talking about food, where they get it, how they do it, how they make it.
Yeah, totally.
Which is predictable and painful. I mean, in the predictability, it's painful. Yeah, but that's been very helpful. The analogy with the eidos where it's actually missing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Or when you think about the eidos too, that has two, it's interesting to think about eidos because it's on one level, it refers to a structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about eidos is structure, but it's also can refer to propels you into transformation. Like that was an edifying discourse, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this kind of way with the eidos where it's got this quality of it's not passive. It's like exactly the opposite of passive, because it's in some sense it's like Jacob's ladder. You're building something, right? Yeah. You're in the midst of building something that you're then going to stand up on in aspiration. So there's this kind of quality of like, there's something that withdraws, but also draws the building in itself, right? Mm-hmm. So you can imagine at some point, like if you lose the thing that draws, you still have something built.
Yeah.
But you're no longer on that built thing doing the thing that you're meant to do, which is building the next thing that's drawing you, right? That's inspiring you. And then you just have to upkeep these structures that no longer have any redeeming aspiration, right? So it's like it's the withdrawal of eidos, right? And
yeah, the emptiness, the zombie-like feel of it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And there's something about I would imagine families, because families are a structure, right? They're an institution, right? And they're an institution. And if the thing that draws families to be families, right, is missing in some way or cut off in some way, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have, I think what you have is you have family drama, right? Mm-hmm. And this is interesting because I have some experience working with families, and I've done some things where I've like gone and I've like went and moved in with the family before for like a few weeks. And right. I think it's because of my temperament. Like people are pretty comfortable with me relatively quickly. So like I can kind of blend in and lose the kind of guest in the house feel pretty, and which is, I think was helpful for this because what they hired me for was to work with the family, but work with them while they were doing their family. And it would be so many interesting places where you end up doing the work. So many times it's out in the fucking car for hours, right? Because or in the doorway, right? Like lots of these kind of places where you're leaving one place going to another, right? Right. Is where the conflicts kind of happen or don't happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so it had, the way it looked would be something like, you know, I've told this one a lot because it's so exemplifying of it, where I'd get up before everybody and I'd sit back in the corner, like maybe write in my journal or something like that. And then you hear mom getting up, right? And you can just tell by the way that she's moving and the way she's getting up that she's already upset, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah. She's already upset for the breakfast that she's about to make that's not going to be appreciated, and that she still has to drive them to the school, and the husband won't do, right? And so she gets up, and it's in all the movements of the way she's like orchestrating the fucking thing. And then sure enough, the kids go like, and they run past, they don't even acknowledge her. And those, so she kind of sulks in a particular way, and they're already annoyed with her. And they boom, and then the father comes out, and I'm sitting back there, right? And the family drama, right, is like just cocked and ready to load to basically take the family dump, right? And then I'll be back in the corner, and I'll just be like, pause, right? And everything kind of stops, freeze frames for a moment. And so it's so interesting because it's like getting them to just pause on that, and then start to articulate like what they're actually experiencing with each other, right? Mm-hmm. At some point when they start to bring their language more towards like what they're actually just experiencing, right? Without any kind of blame, like what they're noticing, what they're imagining, what they're feeling, what they're wanting, right? And they all start to kind of share what's going on from that level. It's so funny because if you remove blame from the communication, you realize that whole drama, that whole fucking drama and all the pain associated with it, like can't survive it. Like, and you can literally feel this, and it's been there for years, this family dynamic, right? And you could literally feel it drop away. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing, is that it's kind of a pseudo pain. It's like a distraction kind of, it's drama, right? It's just it's a series of drama. If you think about what drama is, it's kind of like from this neurotic drama is simply, it's like, I'm being dramatic so I can get rid of the drama. Like, so the drama is constantly justifying itself, right? To be dramatic, so they can get rid of the drama, which of course, do iterations of that, like with 5 people, and you have a whole lifetime of a sitcom, on your hands. And so that just, when they start to communicate authentically, that you could feel that drop. That reveals the real tragedy, because the real tragedy is then you're standing there literally with, this group of people whose nervous systems are designed to love each other, right? Mm-hmm. More than anyone else in the world. Mm-hmm. They're standing in front of each other, and they're in the presence of having no idea who each other are, right? Yeah. Like, that's the real tragedy. And it's also, it's like, and from there, when they begin to communicate, that's where the conversation actually begins, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, and it's basically that they don't know each other. Mm-hmm. No. Right. And they're afraid to know each other, and they're like terrified of one another, and they're like completely need the other one in these deep ways, right? That they can't even stay conscious of needing them, right? They've given up on years ago, right? Like, and so like just getting them to just shift their communication so that the drama goes away, and then confronting the reality, which is they have to face a lot of tragedy with one another, right? Mm-hmm. So we go like, I think that's why people, right? That's hard to do. That's really hard to do.
Very hard. And I mean, I'm also they want you to do the intervention. So they've all agreed to the intervention.
Yeah.
But if there's no agreement there, then they're automatic, being on automatic, the default being mode is automatic. And to get it from that default mode to some genuine listening to each other, that can be very frightening.
Yeah. It's very frightening.
Very frightening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just even one tiny intervention like that,
Yep.
Can be extremely frightening for people.
Yep. Yep.
And you can't do it from inside the system. I found that out.
Yeah.
Or I think we've all found that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or at least it's really hard to do it from inside the system.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Well, what's interesting is like some interesting scenarios to get it to work, right? Because a lot of like each family had their own unique thing, right?
Yeah.
But one I was working with was like they had distanced each other from each other so much that I couldn't catch them really anything.
Yeah.
Clearly there's it's like there was some conversations that there were fights that needed to be had, and they weren't even coming near to each other on some level. So I worked out with the dad. We worked this thing where we turned off the power to half the house, which is where everyone's bedroom was. And we just made up that like there was some kind of the power line got cut or something like that. And it forced everybody right into the front, like basically in the living room. Right. Okay. And so everyone had to sleep in the front, and because it was like winter time or something. So they have to, and it's interesting. It forced the fight and the conversation that they had, but you got to do all kinds of stuff like that.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. That's
totally. Wow.
So did you stop doing that because why?
Oh, let's see. I wouldn't say I stopped doing that. It just hasn't come up a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I've done that. Last time I did that, like I work with a lot of couples. It's probably been a few years since I've been around a family. I've been too busy having one.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm still dwelling with what you said 10 minutes ago with the idols.
Say more.
Because no, just because right when you said the idols propels us into transformation, right? And when that's absent, and we are stuck in this weird paradigm, nothing changes, and it's kind of like an eternal hell. And if there's nothing new comes in, and we all keep deceiving ourselves, and kind of we just go deeper into denial and self-deception. But I mean that's I would argue that's really the tragedy of modernity, because that's not just in one area. It's like in so many areas of modern life. So and then the structures become slowly like hollow and lifeless. So dysfunctional. So and then at some point I would also say that we cannot recognize them anymore. That this S structure has then completely vanished. You go into the supposed family and you think, that's a strange, that's not a family. These are all people, and they are supposed to love each other and know each other, and then like that's all absent, and that's this weird nihilistic pain that's so often the case in our time. And I mean, I also sometimes I read some statistics on like birth rates and right, like the for example the divorcing rates are like in all the industrial countries, they're really high, and like alienation from partners is very high, and I mean really frightening statistics. I mean, I think we talked about it in the first with Sam Vaknin, that video, like this distrust between men and women.
Yeah.
And that there's like this gap just going through the entire society, basically. And that has accelerated with apps and the kind of the weaponization of dating and mating and all of that.
He said that. He said. I remember that what Sam was talking about, that statistically, that everyone that's alive today, right, will die. 50% of the people that are alive on the earth today will die alone.
And that's really how people like Nietzsche in his very prophetic way, but even someone like Nishitani, or when you think of Dijonaro, when he talks about brute facts. A brute fact is just kind of like a nominalist enclosed entity that's just isolated. And this is just one great example for how philosophy is so desperately needed. So we kind of find ourselves out of that nominalist paradigm, because if this goes on, we will just end up in this desert where everything's alone, basically. Everything's isolated, and there's this ontological loneliness where all beings are just as a standing reserve and have no connection to everything. It's just an assembly of assemblies, I think, is a very good word also to, if you want to have another translation for what Heidegger called Bestand, I think assembly is a good word. Because you said, right, Guy, you said families you said they're just nominalist assemblies, and I thought that was a very good characterization.
Yes, assembly, yes, totally. Kind of like, like you assemble a piece of furniture, right? That sense of, I watched my wife and her dad, who they have a really good relationship, but assemble this piece of furniture that it said 40 minutes. It ended up taking like 2 days to assemble this piece. Right. Yeah. But there's and that sense of, because if you think about like eidos, right? So it's a structure, right? But also a propulsion, right? The other sense of the word is like draws you into or draws you forward, right? It has a drawing aspect of it. So it's like, to get close to eidos is to build something, right? It's to be in the midst of which makes sense, because if we've noticed, like, as we've gotten closer and closer into things, right, in these dialogues, in some sense, we have to build these scaffoldings, right, around, right, that we're only building out of necessity because something's drawing us toward it, right? And but in some sense, that scaffolding that we end up building, when we look back around, and what we're looking at was the previous aspiration, right? In some sense, that we're now standing on, right? That sense of that thing that propels us forward, right? I think it's in some sense that whatever's held that flame, right, isn't holding that flame anymore, right? And so even communities, in my experience, really don't organize around communities. Communities don't really organize around, because I've seen that a lot of times where like communities try to organize around just to have a community for community's sake, and it doesn't usually doesn't hold. Something's missing from there, right? It's like people organize around something, right? Around something, a principle or a meaning or something like that. So I would have to say it's like on one level we could say like we could look at like the structure of these things are decaying, right? And we can talk about like in terms of the family and we can look at it from that standpoint. But I would also have to say that like those very structures, right, are decaying because whatever it is that's drawing them, right, is not held in some way, in some way. Right?
And I'm also wondering if that's a necessary thing for our evolution. I suspect it might be. You know, I mean, presumably when families were tight knit and they were organized around hunting and gathering, and they, you know, they fought off their neighbors and they killed them and ate them or whatever they did, you know, and that was a tight knit family, but then, and we often say, you know, everything's crumbling, and the spiritual teachers who supposedly replace the family, and then they crumble, and you know, political leaders they're replacing family, they crumble. But I wonder if it's necessary, if that's a necessary, you know, developmental condition for our evolution. If it's just, you know, like it has to happen in some way. Yep. Like I don't think there's any one family you could say, well, even if they have the perfect Diados and they've got, you know, nonetheless, there's something that's going to happen that because the members of them, you know, it has to evolve, it has to move. You know what I'm saying? There has to be something more, that even if we've got the whole thing perfectly, still there's something more that draws us still. Mm-hmm. So much as we complain about our crazy family, it's totally necessary. Mm-hmm. Totally necessary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's the way it is.
And what do you think about the evolutionary thing and the necessity thing?
I don't know. I also think that I mean decay or degeneration or dissolution. Like someone like Heraclitus, right, spoke about Genesis kai phthora. So Genesis is evolution or development, and phthora is decay. These things were often seen as a kind of a movement that was just tied together, like one movement, life and death, evolution and decay, kind of like two sides of the same coin. The thing with the idols is, I don't know, because this is right. This is in our tradition. This has always been this layer that was somehow different, and I don't think it's subject. I have no idea what the ideas are, and if they are subjected to evolution or something like that. Yeah. Just by intuition, I would say no. But I have no idea. I have no idea.
Daniel and I had an interesting conversation following our last thing about the Shiva, the term Shiva, and how that's the true reality. But that is the nothing. That is the nothingness that is. Yeah. So explain that, Daniel. That I think that as you're talking, I'm thinking about that. So if an eidos is in that place of Shiva, then it has reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the Shiva? So in there's this Buddhist formula: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. And in the middle, there's a when you just have kind of like in Japanese or Chinese, there's just one character that's called soku. And that's soku, which indicates this simultaneity or the sameness. I don't want to say identity because that brings us more into the metaphysical realm, and especially someone like Heidegger would be very, very careful with saying these things. But it's something like the same. And the Soko has then been translated in religion nothingness as Sive. And the Sive is kind of like the nothing is like a point, but not a kind of like, it's a non-point, a non-place, where the contradictions kind of like come together. They have a residue. This is also, I think, like this whole problem with the opposites is so interesting for the entire philosophical tradition, from Heraclitus up to Hegel. Because for Hegel, like in this point is so what's really going on in this middle point? Where for Hegel, then of course there's often this so-called sublation, which is so important for Hegel. Ivo de Gennaro writes in the Parmenides chapter in Principles of Philosophy a sentence that I don't understand it. He says something like, I think it's like, is the sameness between being and thought the retreat of being itself in the inception of thinking? So like in this, what Parmenides articulates, he says, being and thinking are in the same. And then he asks, is this, because being itself in the beginning for Parmenides is this like, really, there's something opens up that kind of like conceptualizes our tradition. And then there's just in a footnote, he asks, is maybe the sameness kind of retreat of being itself? Because of course Heidegger says this, then we have forgotten this being itself in its fullness. Is it maybe in this sameness that there's kind of like still a hint, a beckoning of being itself in this sameness between being and thinking? Although these are, and I can tell you, I've no idea, but the sieve is important because it's kind of like, this is the point where also the dynamicity of reality is kind of like saved. We don't want to, the opposites are in constant tension. And when we seem to be able to hold ourselves in this point where they are in a dynamic tension that is also creative, that propels the world, then that seems to be important for us as human beings, because otherwise, and we would just get into, we then just see, we found what in Buddhism is this famous, what you want to avoid. Either you stick with being, and you end up as an eternalist, or you end up with nothingness, then you end up as a nihilist, and you want to hold yourself in that middle point.
Yeah, being attached to neither. Yeah, being attached to neither.
And exactly, yeah. And that is also this kind of this lived logic where you never stay where you are, but you always keep letting go and hold yourself in that middle point. That is really keeps the dynamicity of everything alive. So now going back to evolution, okay. Now Sandra, you want to say something?
Well, yeah. The original question was, at what place would eidos be? And I, as I see it, if it's in that place of Siva, Soku, then it's real. It's not it's not going to dissemble it, you know. Maybe, yeah, but if it's not there, I mean, and I think you know, it sort of gets to the point of what true form. I mean, Buddhism talks about two truths, you know, absolute reality and conditioned reality. I mean, there are two truths. There are two very true truths. And if eidos is sort of, I see it as the same thing. There might be the eidos that is the ultimate, you know. But then if we apply eidos to such a thing as family or the idea, you know, the eidos of a family or the eidos of justice or so, that's kind of like, there is truth, but it's not absolute. Yeah.
That's why Plato made this other step that say all these conditioned idoi are then there's the idea of the good, and that's really the higher, like that's the highest. That's the highest. I want to say thing, but nothing.
Yeah.
That's just the highest point.
Promise the good is something like holding the promise of being, right? So like the promise of the note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we say that the idea of the good, and there was one participant in my first Nishitani class who actually made that connection between shunyata and the idea of the good, because Nishitani had a very I would say perhaps Nietzschean understanding of Plato, where Nietzsche thought that Platonism and Christianity located this truth on a far side, and that actually happened. I would say one could make that argument that happened in the philosophical tradition. That's even outlined in John's series, if you remember it. So kind of like the principle, we get farther away from the principle in kind of like the tradition of philosophy. And at some point, it's like God is dead and there's no. But if you think, and that participant in my class, he made this more like that this no-thingness is also perhaps the idea of the good, or they are the same, or they are similar in what kind of like what both Plato and the Eastern tradition, they awaken to the same, which is on a near side. So it's not on this far side to which we have no access.
I think that might be why they talk about it in terms of the taste of.
Yeah, and there's all these different ways that it can. It's like the rose, right? The rose from the beetle standpoint, right? So it's comes forward and goes in the background, right? To our standpoint, to like it, in all these different ways that the rose, you start to ask yourself, well, what is this rose then, right? Well, but also as it's being perceived by all these different perspectives in these different forms of life, right? There's something structurally, functionally cohesive that holds itself together, right, in the midst of all of this. So you go like, well, what is that, right? And then, and in some sense, then you have like that's this through line that goes through that, but then there's the through line that goes through all of those other perspectives, right? And so there's this kind of quality where you start to ask yourself, well, when this is the big mystery. This is the I think the thing that's what all thought is in some sense attempting to think, right? Is this.
We at some point we come up with something that doesn't belong to us. That's really something other. This is often when, for example, someone like Heidegger then writes that when he says that the essence or the binding, for example, of the human being has nothing to do with the human being. So like this binding in which we all participate is not something human. So just as the through lines are also, they are kind of like they are somehow different.
Yeah.
And yet we participate in them all the time.
Yeah.
And that's this great mystery.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we don't know what it is.
Yeah, totally. And so it's interesting that we go the way. So I'm reading Salas's book, Being and Logos, and he opens up talking about the apology, right? And where he references a thing in the apology that where Socrates does this retrospective, right? Where he talks about there was the first sailing, right, in his venture into knowledge, let's say, right, which was where he was trying to look for the causes of natural forms, right? And at some point he couldn't find them. They couldn't find them within the forms that, like the natural forms themselves. And then there was this, but he was afraid that in order to look for the cause, like that he would look at the sun and essentially go blind. So he formed what he called his second sailing, right? Which was to look at, which is essentially logos, right? Which is to look at to be able to find the reflection of the sun in the water on the lake, right? And there's something important about this, about like for us to look right at the sun is to go blind, right? And then for us to look just in what is lit, right? Just the forms that are lit, right? Is an end point in itself. There's this third way, right? This kind of the logos, right? This knowing, not in this directly looking in the sun and not directly looking here, but there's this third way. And it's interesting because I hadn't heard this before, like I heard it this time about this. It was when he said that there's something about the human being, and he talked about what gives access to this third way, and it's precisely Socratic ignorance. It's the human being's ignorance, right? And precisely it's knowing that it's ignorant. That's the Socratic ignorance, right? Is this knowing that you're ignorant? And that ignorance is possible in the human being in a unique way, right? To know that we don't know, right, is somehow constitutive of the human being in affording a kind of distance from things. And it's that distance, right, that allows eidos to unfold, right, and to come into presence, right? And you can kind of get this because with Socrates, you can get the Socratic questions, right? Like this, where you never kind of come to conclusion, but he asks these questions over and over and over and over again, and something kind of unfolds out of that, right? That can't in itself be known in some way, but yet we walk away, right, having been enriched by it, right? So there's this through line with this, that Socratic ignorance, right, in not knowing that we don't know. I heard that as, it's funny, I think the thing that I heard about that in this time was it less than something like something like that was unique to Socrates that he brought, or something he did. But now I'm kind of seeing it through this of like, no, that like Socrates like exemplified something that is constitutional of human being, right? Like Socratic ignorance isn't something that's performed in some way, although it is, right? It's realized, but Socratic ignorance is pointing to something constitutional, that something like distance, right, affords the distance that allows what something is to come into appearance, essentially, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you've just described the Buddhist practice of great doubt, of engendering great doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly that. You know, be practicing great doubt to the point where that is your entire being. That is what you are moment to moment. Then that prepares the ground for everything to fall away. And experience, or the knowing of absolute nothingness is available.
Right. Yeah. And it was interesting because after our last conversation, it inspired me. I went and rented Samsara, the movie Samsara, which is, you guys got to see. If you haven't seen that, you got to watch it. Right? Really,
I saw it a while back.
Give yourself some time, like, and turn the volume up because the music's amazing. But it's this thing. It's really what it is. It's, and I noticed at this time, like, what it was doing, right, is it's showing these incredibly beautiful, like stunningly beautiful human and natural creations, right, in their culmination of beauty, right? And then there's this music, this angelic, guttural kind of like compassionate, like silhouettes of just, that gets you all the way in and just rips your heart out, kind of like music going on. And then it starts to show you these completely grotesque images of, but it's in the same light, right? Then you see, all of a sudden you see, you'll see like the dancers of Shiva, like going around, and they're like, it's this, and it's just utterly fucking gorgeous, right? And then the same music's going on, and you see these what look to be like cute little pigs going around a nipple, right? And then all of a sudden it kind of veers back, and it veers back more and more and more, and you're like, wait a minute, hang on a second. Wait a minute, and then there's this pig hasn't moved in his whole life, that's like just this big blob of, like, it's barely even a pig. It's just one, it's designed just to feed milk. And there's a wall between it and the pig's feeding, right? Like, and it's just totally grotesque. But there's still this music going on, and it's somehow in the same light. And then it goes back to this sunset that's like this, and then this, some kind of exploitation of something, right? Of like, and you're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth through this whole thing. And it's like, and I was noticing the meaning that was happening in my body was just unbearable. Like, it was unbearably beautiful. And there was something, and this is what was interesting about it. This is what I think was brilliant about the movie, is that there was something the same between those exploited pigs and the dancers and the sunsets, and like that there was something the same that went through both of them, right? And it wouldn't have been as meaningful of it. It's funny. It's almost like that.
Yeah.
You just sit there and feel meaning itself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If it had just been beautiful, it would have been.
So when I, it's funny. It's like now when I hear what you're saying, Sandra, about like, well, maybe this is actually the way that it's evolving. It's supposed to evolve, or it's like we're all going to die alone. Like maybe this is something important going on.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like I can hear it like that, right? Like that there is something that's being expressed in this decay, right? There's something that's being expressed in this decay that is also being expressed in this beauty, right?
And horror.
Something, there's a through line through all of it, right? When I think of that through line and feel that through line, and then kind of rehear what you said, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a deeper cut of that, right? But
yeah, and I was just really like, I feel I don't express it. I wish I expressed myself better. I just can't. It's hard to express what I feel, and I think probably that's why I've never been good at it. I don't think I've ever been good at it. And that's probably why doing this practice, because I do slip. I mean, we haven't recorded it, but I easily slip into my old pattern of nihilism. Full disclosure here, I really do, very easily. But doing this practice and having time to do this practice, and first of all, it allows for me to see things that I see already, that I know already in a sense, but not able to fully bring into my awareness because my inability to express. And I need help. I think that's why this is, well, so wonderful.
Wait, I'm curious, when you fall into nihilism,
Yeah.
what is it like? What's it like
It's
from inside?
really, for all the hard work that I've done, Guy,
yeah,
it's very disappointing to me that here I am again, like very, literally just like it's all over and I hope I die soon, all that stuff. Really.
yeah.
It's hard to sort of acknowledge how
There's
easily that goes,
exhaustion. Yeah.
The exhaustion.
Right.
Exhaustion for all the effort I've put into it, for God's sake,
Yeah.
And here we are back at square one, as if I've done absolutely nothing to try and, it's just, I really get fed up with myself. There it is, but I do.
Right. Right.
And I just want to withdraw. I really just want to withdraw. Totally just, goodbye, cruel world, that kind of thing. I'm kind of making fun of it, but it's not funny.
It's never fun when you are in that state.
It's not fun. It's not a good place to be.
No. Yeah. It's funny as you're talking about it, I'm present to how consuming it is.
Oh,
Like it really
geez.
does when you like the closer you get to the center of that thing, the more and more it just includes everything in it.
Oh, everything. Just sucks everything in. It
Yeah.
sucks the whole thing.
Including the fact that you're nihilistic again, right? It's like, even that is just.
I mean, I thought that would help if I admitted it, but no,
Yeah.
it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, my name is Sandra. I'm a nihilist. That program never worked for me.
Yeah.
That's a bullshit program, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
Isn't it interesting when we really learn how to hold ourselves in that point of sameness, where we also connected to all other things, that then somehow that, I don't know, that then that is this trap of nihilism can be overcome. I mean this is this like some, for example, Shinran from the Shin Buddhist, the school of in Japan, the Jodo Shinshu, he was, for example, very aware of that fact that we human beings can fall back into kind of like the doubt all the time. And then he came up, and he was so fed up with what he called the self-power doctrines like Zen. Because in Zen, it's always your job to kind of like do all of this, and then he came up with this other power doctrine where it's just more faith based. Yeah. It's less based on reason. It's more based on faith and kind of like entrusting yourself into that gracious workings, mysterious and miraculous workings of other power, which we can never fully comprehend. Yeah. And then that was for him more really a salvific salvation, because he knew you could end up in nihilism. You could do that for 40 years and still could end up in nihilism. And you can be in doubt. And so the kind of easy, so-called easy way out. But that he saw something very crucial, I think, in the human condition. Yeah. That we're kind of prone to fall back into these. Right, you said it, the automaticities. Which even right, we said it before we started recording. Yeah. Even I do that often when you meet relatives and you want to stay authentic, but it's just too overwhelming, and you just collapse and you just fall into automata, which you've internalized over a long time. And all of your good intentions are blown away into the winds, and you just well, and then this is such a human thing. And
it's the easy way out. I mean, that's why everybody does it. It's the easy way out.
Yeah. It's interesting, because I think the other power that you're talking about makes it makes a lot of sense to me, especially in terms of, I look at the structure of when I go into some dark place, right? So far, right, every time I've gone into it fully, like there's some kind of weird surrender right at the heart of it, right? And then something turns, right? Some kind of light turns on, like in the thing that felt like it was gone forever, comes back or comes newly. But that dying part, there was no way around it, right? Like that's where that really makes sense, because there is something. So even in Zen, I would imagine that's not even like, it's not even like they do it. There's a certain surrendering in Zen that I don't know. It seems like it seems like there's a giving up, but something catches you, something renews, right? And that remembering, right? And what's interesting is there's always, and I've tracked this, was in my own experiences, that whenever there's that burst that comes in again, that light that comes on, there's always this experience of like, oh fuck, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you gotta forget about it somehow. Or I don't know. Like, and then and then the next perception is like, oh, I thought that this was gone forever.
Yeah.
And but it's obvious that it wasn't gone forever. And that's obvious now, right? And I think to myself, well, maybe next time I'll remember this all of it. And I just never do. It's like
next time you never do. Yeah. And I think it's just like life. The dying process is the hard part. The death is the easy part.
Yeah.
And the dying is always more prolonged and hangs around longer than you would like.
Yeah. It seems like the thing is looking at right in the eye.
Yeah. Theoretically, that's the thing. Yeah, theoretically. I'd love to be able to practice this the next time, but I know I'll fail the next time too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. I could aspire to doing that, but probably then I might get a little better at it.
Mm-hmm.
It just helps if you have friends.
Totally. Yeah, others. Yeah.
Yeah.
Others.
It really does.
For sure.
Yeah.
So what?
Yep.
I don't think we're going to have time to go into it today, but what do you guys think about surrender?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah, we should explore that.
Yeah.
Let's do surrender next time.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
we went reverence to faith to humility and now to surrender.
Yeah. I think we're on the right track.
Yeah.
We'll be all converted to Christianity.
Yes. Yes.
Or something.
Yes. Yes.
We read. We've started a reading group like a month ago, and now we have this Wednesday morning reading group at this awful time, 5:30 EST. we now read the New Testament, and right in David Bentley Hart's New Testament, and also John Vervaeke also is doing Lectio Divina with that book.
How does it read? How does it read directly? Because he's directly trying to directly translate it from
the way from the
written
the Greek, not the Greek. Yeah. It reads very interestingly. I mean, I've never read really the Bible in English, so I can't really, because there are these translation issues between Bible scholars. I have no idea about that. But I think it reads very interestingly. Has a very fresh touch, I would say.
Very cool. All right.
It reads very dynamically, actually.
Yeah.
All right.
Not dry and stodgy. Very juicy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's call it today, and let's start with surrender next week.
Okay, we'll do that.
All right.
I could ask you something off record, just 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, you bet.
Do you want me to leave, Daniel?
No.